The city of Calvarus stood on the edge of black cliffs. Smoke rolled constantly across the sky from the deep fires that ran under the ground. The people had long grown used to the smell of sulfur in the air. They lived in fear, not of the earth that shook under their feet, but of the great war beasts that once fought for them, and now refused all masters. Armies had tried to control the beasts, yet one by one, the noble riders lost their lives. The beasts crushed men, tore their chains apart, and stood wild in their pens. Inside the fortress, the Grand Council gathered. The high walls carried banners of deep red, marked with the crest of the Queen. Gold cups clinked, boots marched, and voices rose with sharp tension. Many lords in heavy armor stood around a long table where maps lay spread. They spoke with grave voices, and their words filled the chamber with the weight of dread. Again and again the talk circled back to the same point. No human can lead them, one lord insisted, his hand pressing the map. The beasts were made for war, but now they know no ruler. Not even the strongest knight can bend them. It cannot be controlled. The room echoed with agreement. Some struck their fists on the table, others shook their heads. A few spoke of sending more riders to the pits to try, though all knew those men would only die. Outside the gates stood a young soldier named Dustin. He was not born to any noble line. He was not a knight or a scholar of the royal house. He was a simple guard who had risen only through long years of holding sword and shield. He had fought in the streets when raiders came. He had helped lift the broken walls of his burned village. Dust clung to his skin from the roads he had taken. While others spoke of honor, Dustin carried mostly scars. That day, he stood with his spear, listening. The wind carried the strong voices of the lords which passed through the cracks of the great doors. He heard them speak of fear, heard them say that no man among them was enough. Every word cut into him. His hands tightened harder on his spear. Dustin's mind moved back to the day he saw his childhood home destroyed. Fires had climbed every roof. Cries filled the air. He had lifted his younger brother out from smoke, though many neighbors never escaped. The beasts had walked in the distance during that battle, wild and untamed, their rage striking both friend and enemy. That memory never left him. While nobles in their grand halls spoke of honor and power, all Dustin could think of was how it felt to lose everything and still keep standing. Some called upon old rites, claiming perhaps a priest might control the beasts with songs of old. Others demanded stronger chains or darker punishments. The Queen herself sat silent, studying her lords. Queen Margaret had long learned when to let men speak and when to silence them. Her pale eyes saw through lies, and she listened without haste. Dustin, still at his post, did not know that his path was bending toward something no one thought possible. He did not know that the same lords who laughed at him as a common soldier would one day bow their heads. He only knew that when he heard them declare that no human could lead the beasts, a quiet spark lit inside his chest. It was not pride, it was not glory, it was the stubborn thought that they might all be wrong. And in that silent chamber of his heart, he held to that spark, as if it were the last weapon he had. The great war court was carved into the stone belly of the fortress. Its walls were high and dark, holding the sound of every chain strike and every roar that shook the ground. Torches burned along the walls, but even their light looked small when compared to what stood in the center. The beast called Cinder towered like a mountain of muscle and bone. Its hide was iron-colored, its eyes two storms locked inside living flesh. Huge chains wrapped around its limbs, thick as trees, and yet the chains rattled as if they were nothing more than twine. Guards stayed close, but never too close, for no man who looked into those eyes believed he could stand long before them. Dustin had been sent with the other soldiers to help line the court. He thought his task was only to keep watch. His life had never stretched farther than simple orders. Now he held his spear and tried to look calm while the crowd gathered. Lords, priests, and captains filled the stands. They were waiting for the next ceremony, another attempt at control, another knight who claimed he could be stronger than fire itself. When the knight marched forward, his armor gleamed. His voice rung loud with the old pledges. He raised his sword, pointed it toward Cinder, and spoke words from a scroll. For a moment, silence held and hope thinned the air. Then the beast struck. Chains snapped like threads. The knight flew across the dirt, his armor bent as if it were paper. Screams filled the chamber as soldiers tried to press forward and retreat all at the same time. Cinder threw back its head and roared, a sound that shook dust from the ceiling. Men stumbled, some fled, even nobles covered their faces. Dustin barely had time to think. He saw the heavy chain snap free from the walls, swinging wide. A group of younger recruits stood frozen, too shocked to move. Dustin ran, pushing them away before the weight of the broken chain shattered the stone where they had stood. He tried to shout commands, but the air was nothing but noise. Then something happened that none among the court had ever seen. Cinder's storm-colored eyes turned upon him. The beast lowered its massive head and stared at Dustin as though it had known him for many years. The roar died into a deep rumble. The crowd fell into silence, unwilling to believe what they were seeing. Dustin stood frozen with sweat rising on his face. His fingers clutched the spear, but he could not lift it. The giant creature's eyes burned into his. Yet instead of tearing him down, it stepped forward slowly. Its claw, sharp as any blade, came down on the dirt with weight like thunder. But instead of striking, it bent in what looked like a bow. The entire court gasped as the beast lowered itself. Dustin trembled. His head swam as though he had fallen into a dream. He felt all voices fade. His hand shook, and without knowing why, he reached out and laid his palm upon the beast's armored skin. The burning heat of it did not scare him. Blood sang in his ears, but he did not pull away. The queen was the first to rise from her throne. Her eyes widened, her hand resting against her mouth. Nobles whispered in fear, others in anger. Lords shouted that it was a trick, a curse, or a disaster. But the beast did not rise. It stayed lowered, its head bowed just for him. Dustin did not speak. He could not. The only thought in his mind was the burning truth that all the lords had sworn could never be. Yet here, in the middle of the war court, it had happened. The war beast had chosen its master, and it had chosen him. The days after that moment moved like storms across the city. Word spread faster than fire. Every street, every tavern, and every market stall carried the story. The mighty Cinder, the beast that had broken chains and killed a dozen riders, had bowed before a common soldier. Most people did not believe it at first. They said it was drunken talk or wild lies. But soon the truth reached every corner of Calvaris. Inside the fortress, the council raged like a sea in storm. Many nobles claimed the sight was false. They said Dustin had tricked them with hidden magic. Some called him a fool, who only brought ruin. Others shouted for his death, fearing that letting a common man stand above them would weaken their hold on power. But not all voices spoke against him. A few soldiers who had seen the event with their own eyes defended him. They told the truth even while they shook with fear. They said the beast had lowered itself. They said no chain, no whip, no crown, no noble command had ever done that. At the center of the storm sat Queen Margaret, calm as stone. She did not bow to the noise of the council. When the lords roared for Dustin to be cast out, she raised her hand, and the chamber fell silent. Her voice was not loud, yet it carried across the hall. She said the man was chosen, and if the beast trusted him, then the crown would not deny it. No one dared to speak against her after that, for Margaret was not only queen by blood, but by the strength of storms she had survived. So Dustin did not die at the council's word. He lived. Yet with this gift came chains heavier than iron. Each dawn, he was taken from his quarters to the war court, where Cinder waited. The beast stood restless, clawed feet cutting deep marks in the soil. Dustin at first could not believe he must be the one to face it alone. He had never led a host of men, much less a living mountain of fury. But day after day, he entered the pen, and day after day, Cinder did not strike him down. The beast followed him with eyes bright as fire. Trainers tried to teach in their proud ways, demanding that Dustin controlled the beast with harsh orders. They shouted at him, told him to strike with whips, to call himself master of the beast. But every time Dustin raised a hand to strike, he felt a knot in his chest. It was not strength to command through fear. He lowered his hand and stepped close without weapons. The trainers shouted that he was weak. Yet the beast lowered its head and allowed his touch. At night, Dustin lay awake in his chamber, his mind torn between fear and wonder. He feared failure, feared that the beast would turn wild, and the nobles would see him as nothing. Yet when he closed his eyes, he saw a memory of his burned village. He remembered carrying his brother through smoke while walls fell around them. He remembered standing when all had given up. That memory gave him something more solid than fear. The bond between him and Cinder grew like hidden roots in stone. When Dustin walked the pen, the beast followed. When he called out, the beast listened. Not every move was perfect. At times, Cinder roared and swung chains into walls, breaking stone. At times, Dustin stumbled from the force of its rage. Yet always he rose to his feet again. He did not show anger. He met fury with steady eyes, and slowly, the storm inside Cinder began to calm. The soldiers who once mocked him started to watch in silence. The trembling guard who never raised his voice was guiding what none of them could even stand near. The nobles muttered from shadows, but the queen looked on with sharp eyes and saw what others refused to see. Dustin was not a knight. He was not a ruler. He was something that frightened them more. It was proof that courage could rise from the lowest stone and reach the highest throne, if only a heart refused to break. The morning of the great battle came heavy with mist. The soldiers of Calaveras watched the horizon where the sky turned black with enemy banners. Drums thundered in the distance, slow and steady, like the heartbeat of a giant. The cliffs shook as endless lines of armored men marched forward with siege towers, or engines and blades that caught the rising sun. The walls of the fortress trembled not from stone but from fear. Inside the courtyard, the nobles gathered in shining armor, their voices sharp with worry. They argued about who should lead the army. They spoke of sending their elite knights. They spoke of closing the gates and preparing for surrender. Few even spoke the name Dustin, and when they did, it came with scorn. To them, he was still a common soldier who had stumbled into strange fortune. The queen silenced their arguments with one firm command. She called Dustin forward. Her eyes carried no smile, only steel. She looked not at the nobles, but at the young man standing with a plain sword on his back and armor scarred from training. She asked him with calm voice if he would mount the beast and face the storm outside their gates.
Ow.
Dustin felt his chest weigh like stone. Every eye in the court fixed on him as though waiting for him to fall. He lowered his head once, a single nod. The queen's lips tightened, and her order rang through the walls that he should ride. The gates of the war court opened. Cinder stood waiting in the great pen, its breath rising in clouds of heat, its claws digging deep into stone. Dustin stepped forward with slow pace. The beast lowered itself as it had many times before, and without a word, Dustin climbed onto its massive back. The chains of training had been removed. Only faith stood between them now. The horns of the enemy sounded beyond the walls. The ground shook with their march. Arrows whistled into the sky, turning day into shadow. Dustin raised his hand, and Cinder answered with a roar that broke like thunder across the cliffs. The gates of Calaveras crashed open, and man and beast surged forward into war. The first wave of enemies met them with shields and spears. But Cinder's strength shattered lines like twigs in a storm. Its massive claws tore through siege machines, its fire burned across wood and steel. Dustin leaned low, guiding the beast with sharp pulls and shouts. He was no knight with polished voice, but his commands cut clear because they were born of will, not pride. Every strike carried the sound of armies breaking. Arrows rained, yet Dustin did not turn back. He swung his sword, slashing soldiers who dared come near. When Cinder slammed its tail against the ground, earth split open, and men scattered in terror.
Ow.
The men of Calaveras, who had watched from their walls, felt courage for the first time in years. They saw not just a beast, but a man standing on its back, fearless against thousands. They cried out and charged forward, pouring through the opened gates to stand with the rider and the war beast. The field became a storm of steel and screams. For hours, the battle raged. Cinder struck down engines. Dustin cut down captains and riders, and soldiers rallied around them. The nobles who had doubted shook with awe on the walls as they saw what they had declared impossible. At last the enemy line broke. Their siege towers burned, their warriors fled. The black tide that had filled the horizon thinned into smoke and scattered shadows. The broken ground carried silence where once had been thunder. When the fires dimmed, Dustin slid from Cinder's back. His armor was torn, his arms ached, and smoke clung to his skin. He placed his hand against the beast's plated side. Cinder lowered its head and gave a sound that was not a roar of rage, but something softer, something heavy with loyalty. The field of Calvaris, once marked by fear, now carried a single truth that spread without question. A common soldier had done what lords swore could never be done. Man and beast had become one in battle, and because of that, the fortress still stood. The battlefield lay quiet after the storm of war. The ground was blackened and broken. Arrows stuck out from the earth like dead grass. Smoke rose from the ruins of siege towers. The smell of fire and steel filled the air. Soldiers of Calvaris stood among the wreckage, their armor bent and faces marked with tears, dirt, and blood. They were alive, and for many it felt like the first breath after drowning. Dustin stood at the center with Cinder resting behind him. The beast's vast body lowered to the ground, its chest rising slowly as it recovered from the fight. Men who had feared to even look at the creature now stared with wide eyes filled with awe. Some bent their knees in silent respect. Others lifted their blades and shouted with pride. The name Dustin rose on voices that hours before thought nothing of him. The queen rode out from the fortress on a white horse. Her crown caught the last light of day as she crossed the ruined field. She looked at the broken bodies of enemies and at her soldiers who still stood. When her eyes reached Dustin, she gave a long, hard stare. For a moment, the world seemed to hold its breath. Then she lifted a hand so that all might hear her words. She spoke with a voice like clear iron. She said the people of Calvaris had declared that no human could lead the beasts, but they had been wrong. She said that what had been thought impossible had been done not by a noble nor a knight, but by a soldier born to no house, a man who carried no gold or crown. Said the kingdom must remember from this day onward that courage and heart were greater than bloodlines. The army cheered. From the walls of the fortress to the farthest ranks of soldiers came a cry that shook the ground. The sound of it rolled across the cliffs and into the Black Sea beyond. Dustin lowered his head, not seeking glory though it had found him. His hands shook from the weight of what he had done. In the days that followed, the city changed. The people walked with faith instead of fear. The sight of Cinder in the courtyard no longer filled them with terror, but with hope. Children ran through the markets shouting tales of the rider and beast who broke the siege. Songs began to spread, simple and rough, but each carried the same truth. They spoke of the soldier who refused to break when all others had failed. The nobles still grumbled in shadows. Many did not like to see their power shaken. To them, Dustin was a threat, proof that the old ways might crumble. Yet none could raise their voice too loud, for the queen had spoken, and the people had chosen what they would believe. Dustin himself asked for none of it. Live simply, training each day with Cinder, watching over the men he had fought beside, carried scars but no crown. His strength did not come from titles, but from the bond he had formed in the fire of war. At night, he sometimes walked the cliffs alone. He looked out at the sea that stretched black and endless. The wind pressed cold against his face. In his chest, he felt the same spark that had risen when he first heard the nobles say no human could lead. That spark had carried him through chains and fury. Now it burned brighter than ever, but it was not pride. It was duty. He carried the hope of a kingdom, and he knew the days to come would bring trials greater than any battle. Behind him on those nights, Cinder would stand, silent and watchful, its massive form outlined under the pale moon. Man and beast side by side, bound not by chains but by trust. And so the story of Calvaris changed. It was no longer the city that feared the war beasts. It became the city remembered for the man who proved that even the mightiest creature could bow to courage. They had thought no human could ever lead, yet it was a human heart that had done what no power or crown ever could.